Have you ever wondered why your favorite taco is costing you an arm and a leg these days? Or is your dream couch still in back order status for months now? Join us as we go behind the scenes of the global supply chain. Let us discuss and understand its complexity and learn from the industry leaders, professionals, and subject matter experts. Expect in-depth analysis and genuine conversations about the major issues affecting the supply chain today. Welcome to Supply Chain Demystified. Your host is none other than the distinguished supply chain expert, Dr. Nick Vias. Professor Vias is the academic director of USC Marshall Global Supply Chain Management and founding executive director of USC Marshall Randall R. Kendrick Global Supply Chain Institute.
Brendan, welcome to Supply Chain Demystified podcast.
Thanks
I'm
for
so
having me.
thrilled. So certainly the packaging is a very important piece in terms of moving the product through the value chain and maintaining its integrity from the product safety to the pilferage and many other components. So just for the audience purpose, if you can actually give me sort of your understanding of the importance of the packaging within the value chain of the product and also in industry as a whole before we get into the Pacific Packaging Company.
Yeah, so I think it is interesting as being just on the packaging side of things that often the packaging of our products isn't something that we really think much about until it doesn't work or it's noticeably wrong or if it stands out in a really great way. I think everyone that has ordered an Apple product at one point kind of recognized that the packaging that iPhone came in or the laptop was incredibly precise and clean and high quality. But yeah, so I think it's, as we look at the value chain, obviously, everything starts with the consumer in mind. And so the marketing, the communication, the experience, the branding, all of those things are really kind of focused in on making that impact as positive as possible with the consumer. It doesn't always work out perfectly, but that's the goal there. And then every member of the value chain, the packaging value chain that is interacting with that product or that package is going to have some requirements, some functional requirements, some visual requirements, some other type of things that are going to influence what packaging design comes up with. And so, if it needs to be protected in a certain way, if it's going to be bulk packed, if it's going to be shipped, how it's going to be filled at the contract manufacturer, how it needs to, be transported and really the goal throughout the whole stream is to make it as efficient as possible and as cost effective as possible while accomplishing all of those goals.
So Brendan, it's fair to say that packaging has a very critical role to fill within the value chain of the product, because you're thinking about not only the final consumer standpoint of the packaging, but throughout the value chain as the product moves from the factory through the various steps of the supply chain. You are considering all of those factors at the unit level, at the package level, at the bulk level, and all the way through the consumer. So, I mean, you're really thinking it through in terms of when you think about the designing of the packaging, all of those elements.
Yeah, and that's why one of the most important components to designing packaging that is really effective throughout the entire packaging value chain is understanding what are the pain points, what are the goals, what are the requirements for each stage as that package moves through its life cycle. And on the topic of sustainability, in the past, a lot of the conversation or thought process in designing great packaging ended with the consumer. But now it's let's design with the end in mind. So now we're taking and getting feedback from the collectors and from the sorters and from the recyclers and from the packaging manufacturers that are actually going to want to buy the PCR or recycled resin. And so now you really have a more kind of whole approach of kind of adding more members into that packaging value chain discussion as a whole, as it relates to how the packaging is designed and created.
Brendan, that's a great topic, and I want to really get into the sustainability uh, topic of the packaging.
Mm.
But before we do that, let me ask you specifically the question about the Pacific Packaging, which is what you lead. So give me just your background, your journey into this industry, and your current position, and your aspiration. I know you also are the host of your own podcast. So
Yeah.
walk me through both personal and professional journey leading up to today.
Yeah, so PPC Inc. or Pacific Packaging Components was established back in 1970 by my grandparents. My parents actually worked in the company as well for about 45 years. I took over running the business about 7 years ago, and then took over ownership about last year. My passion has kind of been on the packaging side, but also looking at technology and sustainability. And so when I kind of took over the leadership of the company, we moved more into that direction and focus in on how can we help influence the industry as a whole, improve the sustainability of their packaging. And we took a really honest and kind of direct approach, like we would typically do with most of our business. And so we kind of said, okay, like we're going to speak truth. We're going to be honest about the current state of what is actually being recycled and what's not. And we're going to help, kind of educate, brands, consumers, other packaging companies, to really understand what does sustainability mean in packaging. And then on the technology side, I'm fascinated and encouraged by the adoption of technologies that make the development and the design of packaging more efficient, more cost effective, eliminating packaging that is unnecessary. And then kind of taking the whole design process and the whole procurement and sourcing process and kind of shrinking that down to be as efficient as possible, while improving its sustainability. So that's me. That's what I love to do. I've also done a lot of other things too. I've got 3 young kids, and so I coach a lot of soccer and I ride a lot of bikes and try to stay fit. But yeah, my professional life in packaging has been kind of long, and I hope I have. I think like looking forward, my goal is, I'd love to just influence it as much as possible going forward, and in a positive way. So.
Well, that's fantastic, Brendan, and welcome. I think this actually really brings you to the Supply Chain Demystified. My podcast sort of initiated and thought through with the similar values, where I wanted to go behind the scene and sort of demystify how things are made, how things are extracted from the nature into the final product we consume, and think through these issues that we deal with it. And I thought COVID sort of had a sort of an amazing awakening of people understanding behind the scene of supply chain. So when you mention the packaging is nobody thinks about it until it stops working. Supply chain as a whole, that's what it is. It is invisible until it's not.
Yeah.
And it's not is when what happened with the COVID. And I think so that really sort of synchronizes sort of value systems of how I have initiated this journey at USC with the Institute and my role as an academic director for a Master's of Science in Global Supply Chain, to what you both preach and practice in your professional life. So let's get into the sustainability. Over the weekend, I had this burning desire to reflect on the fast fashion, and I wrote this on the LinkedIn, an article abstract about the issue, the burning platform issues that we as a human species are dealing with it, which is sustainability. We know we have a finite resources. We have one planet that we know that we as a species are very comfortable living in, right? The article that I wrote about the detriment to the environment of the fast fashion, 85% of the consumable fast fashion ends up in a landfill.
Mm.
This is beyond just the packaging. I'm talking about the product.
Yeah.
And then I've used some examples in which the social media, the technology, very technology that helps us solve, is causing the problem where we're creating a generations where they are so dependent on this lifestyle that actually really impacts the sustainability and some of the very integral variables that can actually either help or hurt. And so this sort of a dichotomy of this situation is that it's such a conflicted world in which this generation, I'm talking about Gen Zs and subsequent generation, they're very conscious about the sustainability, yet their consumption lifestyle does not support that. So that was a reflection, and it was a sort of a weekend reflection that I sort of talk about it. But I want to link that sustainability to the packaging, because you mentioned something about that you begin with end in mind, right? And I translate that into supply chain terms, which is circular economy, right? How does the circularity fits in to when you say begin with end in mind when you're designing the packaging?
Yeah, so I think the goal of circularity is generally good. I think there are some examples that we could come up with where circularity is not ideal because of the carbon impact, or just because of the complexity of trying to recapture a material and trying to recycle it or reuse it. But I think if we think about kind of circularity as just kind of conceptually, like, you know, we manufacture something with it, the consumer uses it, we're able to recapture it and then feed it back into the system into something that's like kind. And, you know, I think the goal there with with designing things with the end in mind is saying, okay, if we can design this type of packaging to increase the likelihood that downstream after the consumer, it will be captured, it will be recycled, and it will be reused again, then what are those modifications or changes or considerations that we can make in the design phase? And so that's really all it means. It's not overly complicated, but the trouble with it is that we have to take in the input and the feedback from kind of members of the value chain that we typically haven't. So typically we wouldn't go to the recyclers and be like, hey, like, how do I design this better so you can collect it? And so that kind of transition is going on right now, and it's happening at scale. I mean, we're seeing massive companies go to the recycling industry and get their feedback and saying, okay, how can we make this better? And then there's the whole issue with the marketing claims. I'm sure you're aware, but Colgate released a recyclable, they called it a recyclable toothpaste tube. And they marketed it that way, and they collaborated with recyclers around the country to design this tube. But at the end of the day, it was understood that even though it is recyclable and recyclers can recycle it, the sorting process has not been updated enough in the US to where those tubes will ever really be captured in any significant amount. And since Colgate understood this, and they didn't really communicate that to the consumers, there's a big lawsuit now about it. So now it's not only about doing the sustainable thing, but it's also about how to communicate, how to market it in the right way. And that is also a part of designing with the end in mind. Often we just think of designing is just on the packaging engineering side. It's like, no. We have to think about every aspect of designing. We have to design the marketing plan. We have to design the business structure. We have to design the distribution channels. All of these different things need to be changed when we start taking that into consideration.
Yeah. And then not to mention, Brendan, I think that's a great point that you mentioned, the designing through the lenses of different stakeholders. Let's not forget the regulatory compliance, right? I just came from 3 weeks of the trips to Europe, where I had interacted with various stakeholders, both up and down supply chain, end-to-end supply chain. And Europe, obviously, is about a decade ahead of the rest of the world in terms of enforcement and setting up the standards for sustainability.
Yeah.
So they are literally, you talk about the circular economy, they're saying, hey, yes, I know you're claiming to be doing 1, 2, and 3, but we're going to hold your feet to the fire now, and we want to actually have you back up those claims with an ability to provide the data.
We hope you enjoyed another exciting episode of Supply Chain Demystified. Stay tuned for the next demystifying discussion on the supply chain. Visit uscsupplychain.com to stay up to date on all things supply chain.